Welcome to the Top Secret Stock podcast. My name is Simon, and today I have the pleasure to welcome a special guest, Brian Leeners, CEO and Director of Homerun Resources with the ticker HMR. Mr. Leeners, a warm welcome to you, and how are you doing today?
Thank you, Simon. Appreciate the opportunity. I'm doing really well. Thank you. And how are you doing?
Great, also. I heard from your company from one of my followers, and I'm happy to talk about the industry and your company in specific. And I would say we let a straight dive in what I really find interesting during my research and what I really didn't know before is that high purity quartz is foundational to silicon chips, AI systems, smartphones, and solar cells. And how critical do you see quartz and HPQ becoming in a world increasingly reliant on AI, 5G, IoT, and renewable energy? And why is it often called an unassuming yet indispensable mineral? And also, that the global high purity quartz market is projected to reach 1.3 billion US dollars by 2033. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that the usage of both silica sand, high purity silica sand, and quartz silica uh, in areas of technology, and in particular in areas of the energy transition, both solar and battery, it is in a dramatic expansion mode. Electrification is pushing that, but so is the need for higher throughputs um, in the AI space and in processing in particular. So the reason why silica is not recognized as being one of those materials, copper seems to get all of the airtime relative to the energy transition, or most of it. Silica really gets none. But if you look at their use cases, they're both important. Um, Silica is probably, by weight, is probably used more than copper in those end uses. And that goes all the way from electric vehicles to mobile phones to semiconductors to memory to solar to, it just keeps going and going and going and going. So you can see the growth projections. I think your number on the size of the high purity silica market is specific to one area, which is the traditional high end. If you look at the full categorization of that product, for instance, the solar glass industry on the planet is probably around $2+ billion just by itself. And anywhere from 60 to 70% of all solar glass is high purity silica, whether it's high purity from its natural form or whether it's high purity through processing. It has to be extremely high in purity and very low in metal content, in particular iron content. So I think that number, that 1.3 billion that you're using, is a little light relative to the entirety of silica across all of those use cases.
Thanks a lot for highlighting that out and giving the clarification about that number. That's really interesting also to the people interested in quartz and the whole silicia topic. As you said, it's really yeah, like the topic is really unfamiliar for many. I didn't hear about it also, but it's really fascinating, and I'm sure that the demand for HPQ will rise, like especially building out the industries you mentioned. That's really nice. All right, let's dive into your company a little bit. As I think my followers are most interested in that. So. Homerun Resources positions itself in a vertically integrated leader in high purity silicia, transforming raw quartz into products for clean energy, for example. can you walk us through your three-phase strategy and how it spans from mining, extraction to advanced applications like solar glass, energy storage, and maybe beyond?
Yeah, our focus from the beginning, once we identified this particular silica sand resource in the state of Bahia, it's in a municipality in the state of Bahia in Brazil called Belmonte. The silica district is called the Santa Maria Eterna Silica District. It's been known for well over 40 years, I think. But within that knowledge base, it has not been economically exploited to the degree that it should have been. Most of that is related to the logistics of where it sits. But a big part of that is that the silica itself in its natural form is so high purity, especially within the context of the low metal content, again, in the natural form, that it's really more suitable to the use cases that have come along in the last 10, 15 years in technology and in energy, in particular in solar and battery. So, what we identified when we saw it was that, hey, this is something that if we get control of this, the size of the resource, because it's huge, it's hundreds of millions of tons, and the quality of the resource, which is really, really high in its natural form, is perfect for those areas as a starting point. So we identified a vertical strategy that initially focused on getting control of the district, both from a political, economic, and legal perspective. The political control came through our partnership with the state government of Bahia, who are the controllers of a state resource company called CBPM, whose mandate it is to go out within the state of Bahia and find new mineralized areas and then try and move those forward so that private capital comes in order to develop them and turn them into producing assets. So we partnered with the state. So our first entry point into the district was through a lease agreement with the state. That lease agreement took us through a process of auction. In Brazil, when you're working with a government entity that controls a resource, it's put up for auction. We won that auction. We won that auction because our application in that auction wasn't just pay money. It was to take that resource and move it towards solar glass application. And that second phase of that, once we controlled the district, was to develop the logistical pathways and partnerships in order to work to exploit the resource. And we've done that. We've got one more little box to tick here relative to completing that. So phase one is done. We've achieved control of the district. Phase two is almost done. And then phase three is commercialization. And the commercialization within the context of the silica occurs across industrial silica and advanced process silica. The advanced process silica is the silica that you and I have been talking about since the beginning of this podcast, which is focused on the energy transition and eventually into the technology space. And we've been working in the United States with the U.S. Department of Energy through their division NREL in Colorado to integrate and create new intellectual property within their thermal energy storage system that uses silica as its base for storing heat. And we've developed intellectual property patents filed in that area that we now control with along with NREL. And we've been working with UC Davis in California in order to look at new techniques. Historically, the processing of silica has been through the combination of various physical and pyrotechniques. In other words, using large amounts of hydrocarbon-driven heat in order to process and upgrade the silica for higher end uses, and then carry that higher end product through those end uses. And everybody's familiar with silicon as an example. But what we've worked on with UC Davis, for instance, is thermoelectric techniques, no hydrocarbons, just electricity, in order to transition that silica along with graphite from a sister company of Homerun, in order to produce the first silicon carbide produced under only thermoelectric techniques in a one-step process. So we're not only trying to advance our material to higher end use cases, but we're also doing that within the context of trying to disrupt the traditional method for doing that, which is extremely hydrocarbon intensive. So that's the R&D in the third phase. And the third phase is the commercialization across those verticals, again, which is industrial, advanced silica materials, and the energy storage from the thermal energy side. We're working on a few other things, but those are more in the technology space, and we can defer to those in a subsequent podcast.
Thanks so much for highlighting out all this in such great detail. Um, like when I read like the investor presentation, I read that Eurosilicia Sand District in Bahia has exceptional national purity levels at 99.97%, which is with combined with very low impurities, which is really remarkable. And for me, this asset really stands out compared also to global benchmarks. And what I really I'm fascinating about is the testing with UC Davis, what you just said, and for all the people listening here, this testing has shown that your silicia achieved 99.99% purity through innovative methods. That's also really interesting, and I think this gives Homerun a competitive edge in the sustainability and cost applications for, for example, for semiconductors and solar. So, but you've also reported discoveries like high purity quartz lumps in the Canide project, which is in northeast Brazil, and you also hold other assets like Tatooine in Canada. And how do these fit into your supply portfolio, and what is your target resource scale across your holdings in the future?
We have four asset bases in the portfolio. The first and the primary focus, obviously, is the silica sand at Santa Maria Eterna. A short distance away from Santa Maria Eterna, we have what we call our Tier 2 silica. That's 100% owned through the staking of concessions in Brazil. And if you look at that separate, it's a separate district, plus 5 kilometers away from Santa Maria, but looks quite similar. It's almost an analog. So we're assuming that it's pretty close to the same total volume that we see at Santa Maria. The difference in that Tier 2 product is that it has more metal impurities attached to the grains, but the grains themselves appear to be analog and to Santa Maria. And why that's important is the removal of external impurities from a grain of silica is a much easier process. It's a physical process, but it's a much easier process than the removal of impurities that are internal to the grain, which are called inclusions. Our inclusions at Santa Maria Eterna are, generally speaking, calcium and magnesium, so non-metallic in their nature. And we see the same thing at our Tier 2 asset, again, which we staked and own 100% of the concessions. So we see the opportunity at our Tier 2 asset to potentially add to the total resource within the Belmonte municipality, or that Belmonte area of Bahia in Brazil. The third asset, which is also in Brazil, in Ceará, that's hard quartz. Hard quartz has a different natural origin. It's the precursor to silica sand. Silica sand is hard quartz that's been naturally transitioned into grains, whereas hard quartz is still in the hard sort of rock format. And we've acquired a multiple of concessions in that area. We've systematically gone through those concessions to see which ones pass the hurdle test relative to sort of natural form impurities. There'll be more work required relative to taking those through testing to see if processing can achieve really high purities. And then we have an asset in Canada, which is lower grade. It's in British Columbia, the Tatooine asset. That asset was sort of our original asset within this silica strategic plan. We haven't and won't spend too much money on that asset over the next while because it represents a lower grade and a cost that's not equal from a capex or a production perspective. That's nowhere close to what you can do in Brazil. Obviously, if that quartz can be taken to higher purities, then there's a market in the US that would be direct, and that's one of the strategies behind that asset. But that would be sort of the fourth asset in the hierarchy of the four assets that we currently control.
Amazing. Thanks so much for highlighting out all your assets. It's really valuable information to my followers. Thanks so much. And you talked already a little bit about the technical process, but I have one question about that. A major breakthrough actually is the ability to produce 100% antimony free ultra clear solar glass using your own iron silica feedstock. Um, why is antimony free glass important for the industry, and what progress have you made toward commercial scale production, including your planned solar glass plant in Brazil? Can you give us an update on that?
Yeah, the reason why producing solar glass that's antimony free is important is several fold. From a societal perspective, there are health issues related to the use of antimony, and obviously, it's not good for the planet if we're building up large reserves of antimony doped silica or solar glass around the world as we build out the solar build that we're currently in, which is massive. Not only massive in China, it's massive everywhere. Look at the solar installed in the United States last year. It's just, it's giant. Brazil is a giant market. Europe is a big market. Even India and now Africa are starting to turn into large markets for solar because it's really the lowest cost energy production capex on the planet now, in particular in areas that have a good natural solar resource. So the first issue is health. The second issue is environmental, and they go hand in hand. The third issue is recyclability. The problem with antimony laced solar glass is that glass manufacturers are reluctant to use it as cullet in their manufacturing process. And a lot of that is just the stigma related to they don't want anyone saying, hey, that Heineken bottle contains antimony because you use Chinese solar glass as cullet in your furnace to produce that bottle. So you're polluting the supply chain at a time when everyone's trying to clean up their supply chain and clean up, their carbon footprint. So it puts a negative on use of that within the recycle community, and hence there are large piles of solar glass sitting there that are not being recycled back into glass. That's really the only glass product that doesn't get recycled back into glass. The industry is very circular in its current form. So the fourth one is economics. Obviously, the use of antimony and other products like silver, like the bull market in silver, has been fueled by the use of silver in solar. And now the Chinese are preserving their internal supplies for that purpose. And that's caused a shortage of silver around the world. And hence, we've seen a move in the cash market relative to the price of silver. In antimony, we've seen the exact same thing. China controls the antimony market globally. They use a lot of that antimony to dope their solar glass. They're the largest producers of solar glass in the world. All Chinese solar glass is doped with antimony. The reason they need it is because the Chinese use low quality silica with higher iron content, 100 to 100 plus ppm iron. And that requires antimony treatment in the furnace in order to remove the effect of iron in the solar glass and make it extra clear glass so it efficiently functions for the solar purpose. So the cost of antimony has gone ballistic. I think it went as high as $50,000 a ton. So the removal of antimony within the cost of goods sold of solar glass is actually economic as well. So across those 4 points, all of which are important, being able to produce solar glass that does not have antimony in it is not only good for health, not only good for the environment, not only good for recyclability, but it's also good economics and positions us. We're already cost competitive with the Chinese, but it places us into an even better position with the Chinese. It also positions us nicely into the regulatory environment, which is now transitioning towards regulations that limit antimony in solar glass because of the previous issues. And if the world goes to that, then there's going to be very few, if any, silica resources outside of the one that we control that can fulfill that mandate. So it positions us very nicely for both the US market and the European markets. And obviously, we're in one of the best solar markets in the world, where our solar plant will be built in Brazil. As far as the pathway to developing that solar plant, we're at the BFS, Bankable Feasibility Study phase. We've done all of the internal economics and data capture relative to producing our own internal sort of pre-feasibility. We hired DTEC, a group out of Germany, to do the bankable feasibility study. We're in that process right now. Post that process, we will secure the financing for that facility. We've got 2 pathways that are already in place relative to the financing. One is the Senior Development Bank in Brazil, which is controlled by the Brazilian government, called BNDES. That has We've been in deep dialogue with those folks and discussions relative to their participation through friendly loan terms relative to being an investor from a loan perspective into that plant. And then also we've signed up a German contractor, one of the best glass plant builders in the world, and an expert in modern glass furnaces, hybrid modern glass furnaces that use both electricity and natural gas. And we're working with those folks. And because they're based in Germany, it gives us access to the German credit facility for exported German technologies. And that facility has the potential to cover the entirety of the internal workings of the plant. So what we're looking at is getting BNDES, the Brazilian Development Bank, to cover the domestic CapEx costs and getting that German credit facility to cover the equipment costs of the entire build of the internal workings of that solar glass plant. So that's where we sit. The BFS will be done shortly. It's a quick process, 3+ months, a lot quicker than the mining industry. And once that BFS is in place, we'll secure those finance opportunities. We have a variety of different entities that have reached out if equity is required or other loan facilities are required. And part of that is because we've put in place offtake agreements, non-binding at this stage until we get the BFS completed and the financing completed, but non-binding offtake agreements that exceed the total output of the planned facility. And now we're starting to get interest out of markets external to Brazil relative to supplying solar glass as the United States and Europe start to transition their supply lines away from China and away from dependence on China. So that positions us really well to be a key supplier of solar glass into the Atlantic Ocean region. And that's been our target region since day one.
Wow, so many nuggets which are really interesting. Thanks so much for answering that question in such great detail. And you already spoke about the supply chain challenges, and also about the Chinese impact. Really interesting to listen to that. Let's talk about the long-term shareholder value, because I think it's a big focus for many investors. In your 2025 review, you talked about making careful choices that build real lasting value instead of chasing quick wins. How is Home Run working to protect and grow shareholder value over the long haul through things like strong sales contracts, smart spending, new revenue streams, and staying focused on the energy transition? And my last question would be, what possible milestones should investors and stakeholders watch for in 2026?
We've always been quite frugal relative to the use of capital. Obviously, our capital comes through the issuance of equity. We've expended somewhere around $10 million on the total business model, Canadian dollars, on the total business model to date. And that's gone into the build out of the verticals that we're involved in. Some of those verticals will be 100% controlled by Home Run. Some of those verticals will be capitalized within the context of being treated, generally speaking, as a special purpose vehicle. We've created a lot of density within our verticals. And so from that perspective, in particular, if you look at the solution side of our business, which most people don't talk about, but that's where we've developed our technology, our EMS IoT hub that has AI capabilities built into it. A lot of effort has gone into building that out to be really the de facto standard for behind the meter, or what we call microgrids. The capitalization of that business is really going to end up being on a standalone basis or through partnership into a variety of different market spaces. We'll see that as we roll through 2026. The thermal energy storage side, which is a vertical by itself, we're looking at that from the perspective of commercialization this year as well. That will take several years to commercialize, but we already have a strategy in place that we're working on with our engineering talent and external engineering talent relative to building out the first commercial pilot for that technology. It's extremely well suited for industries that require both electricity and heat, because that's a thermal energy storage system. It produces heat and electricity. So we're looking at that particular segment of industry. It's well suited for data centers. So we're looking for a pilot opportunity relative to the microgrid attached to the data center and the thermal energy storage being the center point of that microgrid. Um, and then within the advanced materials, we've got multiple opportunities to take our silica along again with the graphite in our sister company and move those into technology segments and also battery anode. That will be developed and probably will have completed that development this year, 2026. And then we're in sales mode on the industrial silica, and we're looking at what processing capabilities we want to put in place on the advanced silica, the silica that needs to be further processed in order to achieve high market end use within technology and the energy transition. We've done a lot of work with Anzaplan, who are probably the best engineering group in the world outside of China relative to testing silica, both from a processing perspective and an end use perspective. The work that we did with Anzaplan has shown that there are multiple pathways for us to process our silica to higher end use. And we're also obviously working with UCD, knowing that we have the ability to get to X. We're working with UCD on thermoelectric techniques in order to achieve that in a single thermoelectric step, but doing so within the context of technologies that do that, that are scalable and easily scalable. So the plan there is to build out a processing capability that's unique versus the industry. The industry is reliant on physical and pyrotechniques, heat from hydrocarbons, in order to process silica, and we want to disrupt that. So we're working, generally speaking, the big picture answer to what you're saying is based on the work that we've done in the first 3 years of the company. 2026 really represents the commercialization of various verticals and the finalization of research and development so that we can end up at commercialization in the other verticals. So it's a really big year for us relative to significant valuation advances, both from a cash flow perspective and the development of our products into large markets, again, but specifically focused on energy transition and technology.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks so much. And I also think 2026 is going to be a really transformational year for Homerun Resources. And what I can hear out from that, there are great and exciting things to come. And yeah, I believe it was a great summary and a really interesting introduction for people not being familiar with the quartz and silica market. And I have the feeling that I personally gained a better understanding of Home Run, especially, and where the company wants to be in the coming quarters and years. Thank you so much for the great conversation. Since many of my followers and I myself knew very little about this Silesia market before, I feel I'm able to, that I learned quite a lot today about that. Is there anything you want to add there?
No, we appreciate the opportunity to talk to your followers and look forward to the second opportunity to update them relative to what we're doing in 2026 and beyond.
Amazing. I would love to stay in contact and to follow your operational progress. Thanks so much for the opportunity to have you here with us today. And many greetings to Brazil. And I hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Simon. Appreciate your time.